I think the government itself and the corporations that pursued this prosecution would concede their main concern was not the handful of sick and dying animals we rescued from factory farms, but the fact that we exposed what was happening to those animals. And that is the subject of the talk today.
And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Hsiung. And he is one of our awardees for the Hero for Animals Award that we gave last year in 2023. And we gave it to him while he was in jail. And he was happy to see it after he got out. So I'm so proud today to introduce our speaker, Hsiung, who is a member of the congregation. He is an outstanding attorney who has successfully defended the rights of animals and those who seek to protect them. He is a hero to many of us who love animals, and not just our cuddly companion cats and dogs, but all sentient beings of the earth. He is an activist and co-founder of the Simple Heart Initiative and Direct Action Everywhere, which he will tell us more about. Wayne is devoting his life to making the world a better place for all species. He offers hope and specific suggestions on how we can help protect our planet from destruction due to the gross misuse of our natural environment. And as you all know, we had Earth Day, I think it was last Monday, and he's going to be speaking about ways to protect our Earth. And that's one of our biggest efforts here at the church. We want to do something about that. And Wayne is doing his part in this problem. We hope you will give his ideas your serious considerations. Welcome, Wayne.
Yeah, thanks, Dolores. I just want to correct one thing. I agree with almost everything Dolores says, but definitely not a hero. I feel like I am very much a spokesperson for a movement that does a lot of heroic things, but everything we do that anyone might describe as heroic is a result of so many people, including people like Dolores working behind the scenes. So Dolores, if anyone's a hero, it's you for being so relentless and ensuring people hear about this work. I am feeling very, very grateful to be here for a lot of reasons. One, it's just always nice to be here and meet all the wonderful folks who are part of the congregation. I've been a member now for, I guess it's about a year and a half, and it's been such an amazing experience to have a meditative, peaceful place every Sunday to come, to hear from the experiences of so many different community members who've gone through struggles for decades, for civil rights, for gay rights, for the environment. But obviously the other reason I'm very grateful is because I was recently incarcerated. And I'm grateful not just because I have an opportunity to be free and see my family and my dog and walk around and not be in an approximately 50 square foot cage where I was staying for 37 days, for about half that time in solitary confinement. But also because some of the documents and video I'm going to show you are the reason I was incarcerated. And, I think the government itself and the corporations that pursued this prosecution would concede their main concern was not the handful of sick and dying animals we rescued from factory farms, but the fact that we exposed what was happening to those animals. And that is the subject of the talk today. I'm going to make 3 propositions that will probably be surprising to most people in the room today. The first proposition is that animals are being cruelly and unlawfully mistreated, and the corporations who are selling their products know this. Animals are being cruelly and unlawfully mistreated, and the corporations who sell us their products know this. The second proposition, which is even more surprising to many people, is that animals are being cruelly and unlawfully mistreated, and our own government knows this and acknowledges this repeatedly. Very surprising proposition. The third proposition, which may be the most surprising of them all, however, is that notwithstanding the fact that corporations and our own government know that the animal cruelty laws are being routinely and systematically violated in egregious and horrific ways, and I'm going to spare you some of the worst footage, but I will warn you ahead of time that I'm going to show a few images and photos of animals who are victims of cruel mistreatment. But maybe the most surprising proposition I will make is that there is one word that if it doesn't even need to be changed. If this one word were correctly interpreted in our legal system, then all those problems would instantly change. Okay, so those are the three propositions I'm going to make. And the first one is about the cruel mistreatment of animals that corporations know about. So who in this room shops at Costco? I do. I shop at Costco. Who likes it a lot? Maybe more than you'd be willing to admit. I'm the only one, maybe. All right. A few people are admitting they've got great prices. They have a diversity of products, and they've always got these new products. And as a vegan myself, I have to say the company does a very good job of marketing, expanding its repertoire towards new products that fit in a diverse audience, including myself. I'm lactose intolerant and vegan, and so all the non-dairy products they have are amazing for me. So one of the things Costco has tried to do, and in fact, they've been lauded for doing over the last 10 years, is expand their animal welfare and environmental certification programs. In 2016, Costco became the first major food retailer in the nation to announce they were going completely cage-free. And accompanying this cage-free commitment was a certification called Certified Humane, that they began to sell virtually all their organic cage-free eggs under the certification program. And they proudly lauded this on their website, announcing they were now giving animals 5 freedoms, including the freedom to engage in natural behavior, the freedom to freedom to not suffer pain and disease, and a number of other commitments. It seemed like common sense that we wanted all animals. Just a few months after this commitment was made, in October of 2016, I walked into a Costco egg farm in the middle of the night because we had surveilled this egg farm from outside and noticed that the certified organic program and the freedoms that Costco had promised these animals required the animals go outside. And after surveilling a farm in San Joaquin County called Pleasant Valley Farms, which was at the time the major supplier of organic, humane, cage-free eggs at Costco, we noticed that over many days and I think weeks of surveillance, we did not see a single animal outdoors. In fact, the facility was constructed in a fashion, if you just looked at it, you can just look at it, you can, I think, still Google Pleasant Valley Farms in San Joaquin County and it'll come up. Google Maps has an opportunity to look at a satellite image, right? You can see satellite image, and it's actually pretty regularly updated nowadays. And if you just look at the facility, it doesn't look like a farm. In fact, it looks like a huge factory. It's a number of industrial warehouses, and there's not even any greenery around. And yet this is a program and a product that is being marketed as certified organic, certified humane, which the organic program requires outdoor access. The animals are supposed to go outside. And what do we find inside? This is a record from inside this facility. Before I even show you the photos, this is a record from inside the facility that's taken by the company itself. And what this record shows is the percent mortality in a single barn. This is just a single barn. The number of animals that are culled and killed, that they find dead or have to kill because they're debilitated, collapsed on the ground, and sick, and the total percentage. So again, this is one building, right? This is the entire farm. The building as a whole, if I remember correctly, has 8 total barns. There are 45,000 animals in a single barn. In the span of 67 weeks, the flock age is 67 weeks, 9,000 have already died in approximately 1 year. 20%, 1 out of 5 hens has died. And these are just the ones who've died. There are many others who are sick and injured and at the point of death. So 1 in 5. So this second document I'm going to show you. Okay, there's just a little lag. The second document is sworn testimony and a penalty of perjury that the owner of this company, Pleasant Valley Farms, gave to explain why the mortality was so high, 20%. There was an attorney asking this executive, why was the mortality significantly higher for the flock in barn 12 at an older rate, at an older age of 69 weeks? And he says, yes, it was higher from the birds pecking at each other. Okay, but it's pretty significant if it's 20%, because this barn had 20% mortality versus 12% in another barn. Yes, that's why we quit having the hatcheries debeak the birds and we started debeaking them, beak trimming them ourselves. So I'm going to translate some of these euphemisms for you and show you, I'm not going to show you the worst images, but what we found inside this farm was evidence of exactly this, that why were thousands upon thousands of birds, 20% in approximately a little bit over 1 year, dead in this barn? Why was it the case that the mortality was about twice as high as the other barns? Well, what they call pecking is actually cannibalism. The birds eating each other alive because they're driven to insanity and they struggle so much to reach food and water that a culture of cannibalism, of the animals eating each other, develops inside the farm. And what they call beak trimming or debeaking is what they do to try and stop this, because if you're trying to raise as many birds as cheaply as possible in a small amount of space, and they're eating each other alive, and you don't want to raise them outdoors as you're legally required to do under the organic program because it's expensive to do, what you do is you burn their beaks off so when they peck, they can no longer hurt each other. Okay. Oops. And this is a record we found inside an egg farm that's part of the same egg cooperative, New Cal, showing that when they're not speaking in public before lawyers, in their internal records, they even list out, this is actually a document we took, I took this photograph, inside their own facility, where they even acknowledge themselves, their workers, when their workers are tabulating why they're killing the animals and why they're finding dead animals on the floor of the farm, the number one reason their own workers identify for birds dying inside these factory farms that are certified organic, certified humane, and supposedly free range is because the animals are eating each other alive. Okay. So I'm going to show you, again, we have video and photographic evidence of birds who are cannibalized. I could show you, but it's so gruesome. I honestly don't like looking at it myself because it leaves me with nightmares, even though I've personally observed it and seen it. But I will show you the general conditions inside this certified organic, certified humane egg farm at Costco. And this is how the birds are living. I don't know why the video stopped. Oh, here it comes back. Okay. Okay, so this is video footage that I personally took inside Pleasant Valley Farms in 2016. I will note this is before Proposition 12 went into effect. Proposition 12, for those of you who recall, in 2018, there was a ballot initiative that was passed, giving animals more room to roam. This farm, even by its own current statements, claims that it was in compliance with Proposition 12 even back in 2016 when we shot this video footage. And naturally, as a result of seeing things like this, I think most people, when they see an animal trapped, who's lost all their feathers, who's unable to walk, our compassion kicks in and we try to give these animals aid. And that's what our team members did. These are two of my good friends and fellow investigators, Paul Picklesheimer and Jason Oliver. They're completely peaceful, nonviolent people. They have never engaged in any even property destruction, never tried to harm any human being. That is part of our protocol. We harm no one, not even the company. You know, I don't think a company is a person, but we try our best not even to damage the company in any way when we do these investigations. But what we do is try to give aid to animals who are suffering. And when you see a bird who's been pecked clean of feathers, who's unable to walk, in one case, Ella, one of the birds, was covered in feces. She was so weak. It's very unnatural for any animal to be covered in feces and not want to escape because it's unhygienic. It's extremely dangerous to be covered in feces and not clean yourself. We found these two birds, including Ella. We took them to a veterinarian, and a good friend of mine who actually lives in Berkeley, or did live in Berkeley at the time, or actually no, in South Bay, I'm sorry, named Diane Gandy Sorby, and gave these animals veterinary care. So I want to note that this is not just consumer fraud, which it is. This is a clear violation of California law, because in California, Penal Code 597 makes it a felony to cruelly beat. Let me change mics again. Makes it a felony to cruelly beat, mutilate, or kill an animal. And certainly I would say cannibalizing or allowing 9,000 animals in a single barn to cannibalize one another is cruel mutilation and killing of an animal. But more broadly, whenever you subject an animal to needless suffering or inflict unnecessary cruelty upon the animal, you're guilty of potentially a felony in the state of California. And there's no exemption, unlike many states in California, there's no exemption for the industry. The industry does not get a free pass. There are many states where the industry has lobbied the state government and enabled an exemption to the animal cruelty laws for basically anything the industry does. And I could have an entire conversation about the constitutional issues with giving carte blanche to an industry to define the law. There's a rule in the Constitution called the non-delegation doctrine that makes those exemptions constitutionally invalid. But in California, we have no exemption of that sort anyways. And so anytime someone subjects an animal to needless suffering, they're in theory guilty of a crime. Yet Costco has literally not only lied to the public, but allowed thousands of animals by the company's own admission and sworn testimony, by the documents from within the company, showing the word cannibalism, showing 9,000 birds in a single barn being pecked to death, has conceded there is unnecessary cruelty and needless suffering inside the certified humane farm. But more broadly, not only does California animal cruelty law make it a crime to confine animals in a fashion that causes needless suffering, we've actually repeatedly, not just in 2018, but in 2008, we as a state have voted overwhelmingly to support greater protections for farm animals. Back in 2008, we passed a ballot initiative called Proposition 2 that was voted on at the time by more California voters than any ballot initiative in California history. 8.1 million people voted for it. This is despite a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign by the industry. I believe they spent over $10 million advertising against the ballot initiative. But Californians still got the right answer, which is to say, we wanted animals to at least be raised in a fashion that allows them to turn around freely, lie down, stand up, and full extend their limbs, and make it a crime if an animal is confined in a fashion where they're not able to do things. No, this isn't talking about even cannibalism, right? This is, at least they should be able to turn around. What we found in a certified humane organic farm was even worse than this, right? So the companies know that they're violating the law. California voters want these laws to be enforced. We voted overwhelmingly by supermajorities, some of the most popular ballot initiatives in California history, in the face of massive corporate misinformation and disinformation campaigns, have nonetheless still passed to give these animals basic protections. And I mentioned my friend Diane Gandy Sorby. Diane is a retired woman who spent most of her life, adult life, volunteering at dog and cat shelters, helping animals who are suffering or orphaned or abused. She had absolutely no criminal history before we brought those two chickens to Diane. And we did bring these two chickens to Diane, who just gave them some care and brought them to a vet and spent her own money trying to help these devastatingly abused animals come back to life. And she succeeded at bringing these animals back to life. And does anyone want to guess when Diane and I and the other activists brought the information we found at Costco to Costco and subsequently the district attorney of San Joaquin County, what do you think the DA in San Joaquin County did after we brought them this evidence? They charged Diane with a felony. Diane, for the record, never even walked into the farm. She never took any chickens from anyone other than us. All she did was receive the chickens from us and give them veterinary care as an animal rescuer, and they charged her with a felony. And the theory at the time, we later learned the DA was targeting her precisely because they saw her as more vulnerable. They didn't realize Diane is tough as nails, and she did not cooperate. She did not turn the chickens back over. She did not testify against us. She said, come at me, because if you think I'm weak, you're wrong. Just because I'm an older woman doesn't mean I'm not going to fight when my constitutional rights are at stake, and her rights were at stake. And so that's what she did. So that was the response. And I will say, this is not just one kind of off the rails middle manager at Costco. We later discovered through Freedom of Information Act requests that the highest levels of the corporation were involved in attempting to prosecute the animal rights actors, including Diane, for exposing Costco's misstatements to the public. This includes Craig Jelinek. FOIA documents showed Craig Jelinek, the CEO of the entire company in Seattle, was in correspondence with the FBI to try and target people like Diane for giving aid to sick and injured animals taken from Costco farms. I want to point out how bizarre that is for a number of reasons, not just because why does Costco care so much that a woman like Diane is giving aid to a sick or injured pig or cow or chicken? But the other thing that's bizarre about this is these cases didn't even really have anything to do with Costco, because the farm at issue isn't owned by Costco. It's just a Costco supplier. We did not target Costco with anything other than our speech. We went to the New York Times and showed the footage we shot, and Costco had a bad, day in the media in October 2016 when the New York Times covered accurately that Costco was misstating what was actually happening in its egg production. From a legal perspective, Costco wasn't even a party to the case. Yet somehow they're deeply involved in a criminal case that's in a completely different state that has nothing to do with any of its property. And the only link to Costco is what we said in the media. And yet still, the FBI is interviewing Costco and asking them about our supposedly defamatory campaigns. I'm still confused as to why the FBI is involved in a case of defamation against the company. Defamation is normally a civil issue, and the FBI doesn't usually involve itself in defamation cases involving large corporations. The corporation has plenty of lawyers itself. If they'd like to sue us, they can. But this tells you a lot about how our legal system actually operates and how the laws bend to power and money. Okay. So that's proposition one, that I just don't want to create any feedback between the two microphones, that the largest corporations in the world know that animals are being cruelly and illegally mistreated and are still selling us their products. Okay. So I'm going to give you another proposition, which is that our government also knows that there are violations of law. This is a transcript from the most recent trial I had. I will tell you more about the slide right before this in a moment. But before I jump into this concept of the banality of evil, which is kind of an explanation for how all of this unfolds, this is a direct transcript from my most recent trial in Sonoma County, which involved another major retailer and another major egg production company called Weber Family Farms, also known as Sunrise Farms. And this supplies certified humane eggs to Whole Foods. And I mentioned to you previously that Proposition 2 was passed in 2008 and went into effect in January 2015, indicating that animals need to have at least enough room to stand up, turn around, and spread their limbs. It seems like the minimal requirement any decent human being or company would give to the animals under their care. And in testimony, the owner and president of this company, which is a company that has over $10 million in sales, it feeds to another company, Whole Foods or Amazon, which is the largest retailer in the country now, owned by Jeff Bezos, the richest man in America. And in this case, one of the things we set forth, and we tried to set forth in court, was the company itself was violating the law, and they knew they were violating the law, right? And one of the laws at issue was Proposition 2, this notion you cannot confine animals in spaces so tight that they are unable to spread their wings, their limbs, and turn around. And so this is actually me asking these questions because I was representing myself in this case. When we said and we attempted to present evidence that the company itself had been violating the law and that we were trying to rectify the legal violations the company had been involved in, inflicting, really pretty obscene suffering on hundreds of thousands of animals. The owner responded that, well, no, the truth is it's true that Prop 2 went into effect and we used to have these vintage systems, but we took those systems out, right? And I asked him, okay, and your company was still using some of these cages after Prop 2 went into effect, wasn't it? So I'm basically trying to get him to concede that he violated the law. And he responds, in 2015, there were no battery cages for Weber Family Farms. Battery cages are these vintage systems and the animals are confined in a fashion that everyone who was part of the debate in 2008 on both sides agreed that these are the systems that needed to be phased out if this law went into effect, and it went into effect in January 2015. So he's saying, what I think legally was his requirement to say, and was his duty as an owner of an egg farm in 2015, after this law went into effect, that there were no battery cages for Weber Family Farms. This is a scene from inside Weber Family Farms that I personally shot. It is me behind this camera walking around in October of 2016, a year and a half after battery cages, under Mr. Weber's sworn testimony under penalty of perjury, which is a felony in the state of California. When you lie in court under penalty of perjury, in theory, you could be charged with a felony. And this is video footage that I shot from a year and a half after supposedly battery cages have been phased out. We found not just battery cages, we found hundreds of thousands of animals in a single barn, not in the entire farm, in one barn. 200,000 plus animals. There are records inside the facility indicating every single one of these animals was confined in a battery cage just like this. This is what a battery cage is. It's a cage where you stuff about 8 to 10 hens in a size of a large filing cabinet, and they live for approximately 2 years in that cage, never stepping outside of the cage. And that is their life. So we had this video footage. I was in court. Mr. Weber lied, or at least, I mean, I guess charitably you could say he misstated things. The government heard all this. The judge, the DA of the county saw him say, yeah, it was our legal requirement. You saw in that testimony, he said, yeah, it was our legal requirement that we not do this. And then we submitted an evidence. We tried to get an evidence saying, well, you know, he just said it was his legal requirement. He said he complied with the legal requirement. We have 100% proof that they were violating that legal requirement, which again is a crime. It's not just an administrative violation. What do you think the district attorney in the court did? Not just nothing. They forbade me from showing this video to the jury and said, if even published this in the media openly, if we publish some of this excluded evidence, that I may be held in contempt and thrown in court for trying to tamper with the jury. Right? So I was tampering with the jury by trying to show truthful evidence that a witness for the state had lied. So let me just walk that back again. The government sees the company say, yep, we had to do this or it would be a violation of law. We show them the exact video footage that multiple witnesses, not just me, and this is not one clip. We had hundreds of clips exactly like this in 2015 and in 2016 and in 2017. So for years, showing this company was routinely violating the law by their own concession. And the government's response was just to forbid us to present the evidence to the jury and potentially throw me in jail for contempt, even if we publish this openly, publicly. I was gagged throughout the entire trial. And the judge ultimately concluded that she didn't just not want me to show the evidence that she didn't want shown in court. I wasn't allowed to talk to the media at all. So every civil rights organization that we reached out to said this is clearly unconstitutional. The ACLU wrote the judge a letter. The dean of Berkeley Law School, who's a First Amendment scholar himself, wrote the judge a letter as well saying this is clearly unconstitutional. Nothing changed. And I was still gagged throughout the trial. It's not just in the United States, though. The government knows that illegal animal cruelty is happening. And on Earth Day, I'd be amiss to not point out that the world's most important carbon sink, the Amazon rainforest, is currently being burned to the ground, mostly because of illegal cattle ranching. So this is especially true under Brazil's former president, Bolsonaro, who's thankfully no longer in office. But about 1/4 of all the carbon dioxide being absorbed by the terrestrial landmass of the planet Earth comes from one place on this planet, the Amazon rainforest. And the Amazon rainforest is in the process of disappearing forever from the face of the planet Earth. Anyone want to guess what percentage of the Amazon destruction is being caused by cattle ranching? What do you think it is? 80%. It's a very good guess. So virtually all of this devastation is being driven by cattle ranching. And a shockingly high percentage, I've seen estimates as much as 50% of this cattle ranching is illegal cattle ranching. They're not allowed to do it because even the Brazilian conservatives who obviously have a vested interest in the beef industry and in cattle and corporate profits concede that there are laws in place that protect the Amazon rainforest, and for good reason, because the Amazon rainforest is effectively the lungs of the entire planet Earth. And it's being decimated to the point that we will no longer have 1/4 of the carbon sink capacity of the planet Earth within a few decades if we don't stop this. And I will note, while it is very easy to blame the Bolsonaro regime, and I think the Bolsonaro regime certainly should share a significant part of the responsibility for this devastation. The number 2 company that buys Brazilian beef, the number 1 company is China, because China has a population of 1.3 billion. It's a population that is increasingly wealthy, and as they become more wealthy, they eat a lot more meat. But guess who's number 2 on the export list? Us. So I think it was the Washington Post. I'm going to get this quote want to get this quote. The Washington Post recently did an expose of Brazilian beef in the Amazon rainforest. And this is directly from the Post's own investigation after talking to dozens of experts all over the world, looking at the climate science and the evidence of the devastation of the Amazon rainforest. And this is from the Post. If the Amazon is to die, it will be beef that kills it, and America will be the accomplice. If the Amazon is to die, it will be beef that kills it, and America will be the accomplice. Okay, so this is all very disturbing and very sad, and I promise you, I will get to solutions in just a moment. But before we get to solutions, I want to have a better diagnosis of the problem. And while I've said some, not unkind things about certain political figures like Bolsonaro, which I think, though unkind, are probably factually accurate, that the Bolsonaro regime was violating the law, that Mr. Weber was misstating the truth when he said that they had no battery cages at Sunrise Farms in 2015. I think the more important problem that really is at the root of all of these atrocities, and I don't see how you can describe thousands of animals eating each other alive in a single barn being marketed as humane as anything but an atrocity. But we understand from now a few decades of sociological and psychological research that most atrocities are not just driven by a handful of bad people. They're driven by the normality of evil among all of us, right? The banality of evil. And this is what Hannah Arendt coined as a concept to explain how the Holocaust happened. Hannah Arendt was a philosopher and historian who actually went to the trials of the Nazis. And she found, shockingly, that many of the Nazis who were responsible for the murder of millions of Jews and other people treated their atrocities as just routine bureaucratic jobs. So Eichmann himself, for example, when you looked at his diaries, he didn't strike anyone from the diaries as a malicious person. He would be writing about how, we got to hit our target of 6,000 today. And, Johnny's not doing a good job and I'm really worried about it. I need to figure out a way to get him on to like a better path so he's a more productive worker. And my boss is giving me a lot of heat because we didn't hit 6,000 last week. And then you realize he's talking about killing people. But the reason it happens is not because Eichmann and the other people who perpetrated the Holocaust were these uniquely evil people. They were ordinary human beings, just like the rest of us. It's because the evil had become banal. And banal means normalized. It's just so obvious that we just have to do this and everyone else is doing it. It's just part of life that we don't even think about what the consequences of what we're doing are. And human beings, our magic superpower is our ability to coordinate among large numbers. Yuval Noah Harari, the famous historian, has written that this is the thing that has made us a dominant species on this planet, the way we work together on the scale of millions or even billions. But the cost of that collaboration and cooperation is sometimes we do things that everyone else is doing unthinkingly without realizing we are part of the banality of evil. And so the prosecutors who prosecuted Diane Gandy Sorby merely for giving aid to a sick animal, even the CEOs at Costco who decided it was an act of terrorism to protest their company for lying to the public. And yes, even ordinary consumers who go to a grocery store and buy that product without thinking about whether that certified humane egg is actually certified humane. This is a collective delusion we've all told ourselves. It's the banality of evil, that we don't want to believe that there are animals literally eating each other alive. We don't want to believe that 1/4 of the carbon carrying capacity of the planet Earth is being burned to the ground because of our hamburgers. And so we don't believe those things. So the solution when a form of violence and evil is so deeply entrenched and normalized is also quite clear. How do you challenge normalized violence? Well, you normalize the challenge to it. Let me just say that again. How do you challenge normalized violence? Well, you normalize the challenge to it. And so one of the things we've been doing over the last 10 years at an organization I co-founded called Direct Action Everywhere is normalize the challenge. We have now rescued hundreds of animals from factory farms, laboratories, and other abusive facilities across the world, in Canada, the United States, even in China. And what we've done is pointed out that far from normalizing and legalizing illegal and unlawful animal abuse, there are principles in our legal system not just the animal cruelty statutes, but even in our Constitution, that if we properly understood and interpreted them, would give a right not only to citizens to give aid to these animals, but also to the animals themselves to have their basic dignity interests protected. I'll give you one example that might sound ambitious and might even sound ridiculous to many of you, and I'll explain why I think this is an example that's not so ridiculous, and I think will be vindicated by law and society in the next generation. And that is from the Fifth Amendment of the US Constitution, from the Bill of Rights. So when the Fifth Amendment was passed at the founding of this country, there are many individuals, human beings, who are not considered persons. So the Fifth Amendment's protections were not widely understood as applying to, for example, slaves. There's a Supreme Court case called Dred Scott, where the Supreme Court actually expressly held that African slaves are not people. Another category, which many people in this room fit, is women. When Susan B. Anthony attempted to vote in the 1890s on the grounds that I am a person, I am a citizen who cannot be denied my Fifth and Fourth Amendment rights, she was held criminally accountable and said, not only are we going to say you're not a person and a citizen who has the right to vote, we're going to throw you in jail for this. Right? And we've seen through time that the Supreme Court in the Dred Scott case, the judges who prosecuted Susan B. Anthony for merely attempting to assert her basic dignitary interest, her rights as a citizen and a person in the United States, were wrong. That the proper interpretation, even in 1776, of the term person was that it should include people of color like myself, like Dred Scott. It should include women like Dolores, like other people in this room. It should include everyone who has moral and legal interests. And certainly women and people of color have moral and legal interests. But there's another category of beings who also have moral and legal interests. And I'm not talking about corporations, although the Supreme Court has held that corporations are persons. I'm not talking about the estate of a deceased person, although courts across the nation have held that the estate of a deceased person is also a person, just an estate. It's just a legal fiction, an entity that's been created to ensure the assets of a deceased person are allocated. And this legal entity is considered a person under the law. I'm talking about animals. And I don't mean that animals are human beings. No scientist who is even remotely sensical or reputable would say that a human being and a chicken and a pig and a cow have the same interest. But similarly, no scientist worth their weight in scientific credibility would say a biological female and a biological male have exactly the same interest. For example, I will never need a right to an abortion. That doesn't mean I'm not a person. It just means women have different needs and interests than men do. And similarly, human beings have different interests than animals. It does not mean that non-human animals cannot be legal persons who have, importantly, a right to life and liberty. That is the due process clause of the US Constitution. It is arguably the most important principle in the American legal system. It is a principle that if we change the interpretation of a single word, the word person, to reflect what it actually should mean, then suddenly all the animals across the nation, all the district attorneys who are defying the law, refusing to enforce the animal cruelty laws, all the corporations that are confining animals so tightly that they're literally eating each other alive, will be in violation of not just the law, not just our consumer expectations, but the most fundamental political norm of our entire nation's history, the US Constitution. And that's what I mean by channelizing or normalizing the challenge to a form of oppression. So there's been work in this regard already happening across the world. In New Zealand, partly because of animal rights and environmental activists, the government has recognized for the first time in New Zealand history that a river can be a person. This is a river called, let me get the name of it right, the Wanganui River in New Zealand. And because of its environmental and ecological importance to New Zealand, the government has recognized this river should have legally cognizable rights. The state of India, or not the state, the government of India has recently recognized that an elephant can be a person because an elephant held captive in a zoo or a circus has an interest in their own liberty. In the wild, these are animals, majestic animals that range often dozens of miles, square miles in a single day. In a zoo or a circus, they're often confined to a cage where they can barely even turn around for hours and hours and weeks on end as they're transported from one circus to the next. And if India can recognize that an elephant is a person, if New Zealand can recognize that a river is a person, then the United States, which has always seen itself as a country at the forefront of democracy and recognition of civil and human rights can surely recognize that animals are persons too. Susan B. Anthony lost her trial. Many people do not recall the struggles they had to go through to win the right to vote. And interestingly, the judge refused to incarcerate her, but did incarcerate all the poll workers who allowed her to vote, because when she made this argument at the polls, the poll workers, the voting workers themselves thought what she's saying actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, what is Susan B. Anthony if she's not a person? Who is she if she's not a citizen? She's not a chair. She's not a pencil. She's not a thing. So I guess we should give her the right to vote. And Susan B. Anthony, for the record, she was a very persistent and persuasive person. So I think her individual attributes of persuasion certainly played some role. They did actually jail the poll workers merely for allowing her to vote. And that reminds me a lot of what happened to Diane Gandy Sorby, who wasn't even directly involved in the illegal act, but for receiving the chickens from us. She was charged with serious felonies. We found over time is that response, that overreaction from the system, incarcerating the poll workers who tried to allow Susan B. Anthony to vote, trying to incarcerate my friend Diane Gandy Sorby for merely taking a sick animal to the vet, is part of the thing that drove the narrative forward. Even more people paid attention to the fact that Susan B. Anthony was being charged when the poll workers were tried and sent to jail. In fact, multiple media outlets around the world said this is the trial of the century. We all need to know more about this. What is going on with this ridiculous situation where a woman, merely for asserting that I am not a thing, I am a person who has dignitary interests and rights, I am a person, she and the workers who worked with her and allowing her to vote were thrown in jail. And the same, I think, will be true of non-human animals in our environment. So we are in the process of establishing a roadmap, which is extremely ambitious, but I think achievable. Establishing a nationwide right to rescue, acknowledging that animals are persons, and that therefore, because they are persons, when a human being sees one of them suffering, constitutionally, given that every person has a right to life and liberty, if we see an animal's life and liberty right being violated, we should be able to give them aid. We should not be incarcerated. And we have 4 different subcategories of work that we need to do over the next 25 years to get to this right. But I will say, before you tell me that this seems impossible in a world where there are 10 billion farm animals slaughtered, there are over 100 million animals experimented on, there are millions of animals tortured and killed in cages because of their fur, so someone can wear an expensive garment. While I was incarcerated in Sonoma County, every single time we have had a remotely fair outcome in court, and we've been able to present these arguments about the dignitary interest of animals, about the cruelty and unlawful behavior inflicted on these animals by corporations and on human beings in many cases too, because the workers themselves at these slaughterhouses and factory farms are treated deplorably, to the point in some cases they're literally enslaved. And I will back that up with evidence. If you don't believe that, come and talk to me afterwards, because some of the workers themselves are shipped in from other countries to work in these places, because who wants to work in a place where thousands of animals are eating each other alive every day? Very few Americans want to work in that place. The best place to find workers is a foreign country where the workers are desperate for some sort of employment. You ship them in, you enslave them. But every time we have actually been given an actual opportunity to show the video footage that I showed you today, to show the photographs and the evidence of the illegal conduct of the industry, juries, even in heavily conservative and rural counties, have acquitted us, have decided we believe in the right to rescue. We believe that animals are persons, that the environment should be protected. And this includes a county in Utah, which is hardly considered a progressive state, called Beaver County, Utah, where 90% of the people in that county voted for Donald Trump. 1 in 3 people in that county work in animal agriculture. Even in that county, a jury of our peers, and we were given an opportunity to show a few clips of the conditions the animals are raised in. When we're given an opportunity to testify why we did what we did to help the animals we saved, and we saved 2 sick piglets from that particular factory farm, 8 members of the public, randomly drawn from this 90% Trump county, sided with us and said what you did was right, what you did was moral, and what you did, we will support. And if in 90% Trump County, we can get 8 random members of the public to support us on the right to rescue, then I think in 25 years, we can convince the Supreme Court to give animals and the environment what they've always deserved, which is their recognition of their most basic legal rights. So thank you all for being here today. And I just want to give a special acknowledgement to the church, because one of the reasons I am out today is because many people in this church, including Dolores and our own Reverend, Vanessa Southern, wrote letters to the court indicating that I'm a person of character and that I should not be given the potential 6-year sentence that was in the works. And as a result, I was only given 37 days. And I do think Vanessa's letter in particular was quite powerful. So I have a lot of gratitude to her for writing. But I will say all of us have the power and the opportunity to push things in this direction. That can be in small ways, like just looking into a little more carefully where your own eggs are coming from, or even better, adopting a plant-based diet, which I can certainly give you advice on. It can be in bigger ways, like Dolores and her husband David, who have actually been out there with us. I think Dolores and David were both in the room on the day of sentencing, and it makes a big difference when the public comes out because the bureaucrats and the government officials and the Bolsonaros of the world see the public will not allow them to continue to violate the law and put people in prison for trying to ensure the law is enforced. But whatever it is that you are able to offer, I highly, highly encourage and ask and request and beg you to do something about this. Because again, if we are going to solve these deep-rooted problems of violence and suffering on this earth, it's not just about the villainous figures we see in the media, the Trumps, the Bolsonaros. It's about the banality of evil. And the people who can solve the banality of evil are the people in this room. Thank you very much.
We've heard the testimony of expert witness attorney Wayne Hsiung. Now is the opportunity for a cross-examination. You are welcome to write on note cards the questions, and I'll be glad to pose those to the plaintiff. I am nearly vegan, but still consume cheese and some eggs. I get my eggs from a small farm in Tolo County via a CSA box. Could these eggs be ethical and humanely produced?
That's a great question. First, I just want to applaud whoever wrote that question for making those efforts. That's tremendous. And I know it's hard. I personally was an obligate carnivore for the first 16, 17 years of my life. I mean, I was the sort of kid who'd come home from school and just eat an entire stack of bologna. And these traditions are so deeply ingrained and habits are so deeply ingrained. And that is the source of a lot of evils in the planet Earth's history, that there are traditions and customs that we don't even choose, that we're just forced into our lives, and it's hard to give them up. And so making any effort is obviously tremendous and well worth applauding. This is controversial within the animal rights movement. I think it is possible for chickens to be raised in a fashion that is humane and compassionate and for their eggs to still be consumed. But I think what is less controversial among animal rights activists is the more fundamental political and moral proposition about what a society that uses vulnerable creatures for those purposes will inevitably do. And the comparison for me is child labor. The animals of this earth will always be powerless in the face of human society. And they're the one marginalized group that will never be able to very effectively fight back, because we have bred them and genetically engineered them and selectively chosen offspring for 10,000 years since we first put the yoke and the chain on an animal's neck. Domestication of animals happened about 10,000 years ago. Not sure exactly which animals domesticated first. Could have been the dog, could have been the chicken, but it was about 10,000 years ago. And it's part of the reason for the agricultural revolution, because we domesticated these wild animals. And one of the interesting things about this domestication process is we chose all the most gentle and dependent creatures, and then we selectively bred them through thousands of generations to become even more gentle. Most people do not know that a farm pig is a 800-pound animal who evolved through selective breeding from a very fierce creature. If you see a wild boar that is 400 pounds, probably need to walk away, because that wild boar could hurt you very badly. A domesticated farm pig is a gentle giant. They've been bred through a process called neotenization to be childlike. This is the way dogs are very gentle too. The dogs evolved from a very violent animal, a wolf, and they've evolved to have childlike characteristics. A fully grown dog is like a puppy wolf, essentially. They're playful, they're dependent, they like to play. And the natural result of that process, however, is you have a class of beings who are completely vulnerable. They do not have the instinct to fight back. They don't know how to protect themselves. Even if they had the power to fight back, they're unwilling to do so. So I've seen farm pigs, for example, run away from children. Like a 3-year-old child will run up to a farm pig, and the farm pig that's an 800-pound animal run away. I've seen farm pigs incredibly frustrated and hurt, shocked and beaten by workers, refused to even push back against the workers in fear. And so the problem with any sort of commodification of these animals, just like children, in a situation where they'll always be powerless in the face of their human masters, is there will always be the temptation for bad people to use that power against the powerless in a way that's very counterproductive. And for that reason, we have very strict regulations about child labor, even in a family. You know, you cannot force your 10-year-old child to work. They have to go to school. You have to give them basic protections, because we understand, even in the family context where we normally expect the parents to care for the children, there's certain requirements and rules. You cannot force them to work. And similarly, I think in the future, while it is theoretically possible for you to raise eggs yourself in a way that is humane to the chickens, the problem is, once you commodify the animals and start using them for some commercial purpose or even a non-commercial purpose, once you start seeing that animal as just a being that is giving you some instrumental value, rather than seeing that animal like a dog or a cat or even a human being is a living being who has intrinsic value, that can very easily be corrupted when the animal at issue is themselves very unable to report to the authorities that, oh, that family that keeps saying they're treating me well, like, I'm stuck in a cage all day. Can you do something about this? That chicken's never going to be able to call 911. The kid actually could in theory, but the chicken never will be. And so in a situation like that, you can never be guaranteed. And I'll say one last thing. A lot of those egg farms that I showed you video footage of, they sell in farm markets and say they're family farms that are selling, free range certified humane products in the local farmers market. So you can't be sure unless you've seen it yourself where the hens are actually being raised.
Soybean farming in the Amazon, does eating tofu contribute to this?
It does. But the important point to note about this is that soy plantations across the world are primarily being used to create animal feed. There is a basic thermodynamic reality to the food system. And that is this, that for every calorie that goes in a plant or animal-based food, we usually have to spend at a minimum 8 calories of plant-based protein in food, right? So that's chicken. Chicken, the thermodynamic ratio is about 8 calories in to create 1 calorie of human consumable calories out. With cattle, it's like 30 to 1. But even 8 to 1 is awful. That's an enormous amount of waste. So I think that there are problems in plant-based agriculture as well. Industrial monocropping is devastating the planet. It's a horrible system. But if your primary concern is that, you need to stop using animal products, because even the most efficient animal product, and there's an article recently, actually in my last talk, I cited this article. I think it was in the Proceedings of the National Academy of the Sciences, which is among the top peer-reviewed journals in the sciences, showing, and it was a study that reviewed, I think, 40,000 different food products and found the most sustainable and environmentally friendly animal-based diets were much worse than the least sustainable plant-based diets. So again, let me say that. The most sustainable animal-based diets were worse than the least sustainable plant-based diets. And the reason for that is, again, when you look at chicken, which is the most environmentally efficient animal product, it's still essentially 80 to 90% waste, because for every calorie of soybean you're creating, or for every calorie of chicken protein you're creating, you're wasting 7 calories of soy, because the chicken is eating it, is pooping the soy, is living for 6 weeks, processing energy and using it. And while chickens have been, again, bred for 10,000 years to be extremely efficient protein producers, it's still more efficient just to go to the underlying product, which is the soy that so many of these animals are being fed. So yes, it's devastating, and that's an even more important reason for us to shift away from animal-based products.
Could recognizing the personhood of animals strengthen the argument of pro-life, anti-abortion activists who claim that fetuses are people?
Fabulous question. And that's another example of the constitutional argument over personhood, right? That the Alabama Supreme Court, sadly recently held that a single-celled embryo is a person. And to me, I think it's actually the opposite. I think arguing for animal personhood strengthens the argument against fetal personhood, because the Alabama Supreme Court was motivated by a standard of personhood that depended entirely on humanness. What defines whether an entity is a person is, are they Homo sapien? And so it doesn't matter if even it's a single-celled embryo in a fertility clinic that has no interest, no feelings, no consciousness. It's no different than a skin cell in many ways, except it's, evolutionarily has a different purpose, but in terms of its actual capabilities, a single celled embryo and a single celled skin cell are virtually identical. And we're shedding billions of skin cells, losing skin cells right now. Sorry if anyone's upset. Hopefully no one's too upset, but I just killed off some skin cells. But the skin cell has no feelings. It has no consciousness. It's morally equivalent to a chair or a rock. There's no interest there, right? Well, the animal rights movement's perspective is the standard is not the humanness of a biological or even non-biological entity. It's whether the entity has interests, whether the entity has feelings, whether the entity can feel pain and fear. Right. And I think that's a much more plausible account of personhood, that what matters is not whether someone is black or white or gay or woman or straight or a dog or a cat or a human. What matters is, can they feel? Do they have legally recognizable interest? Do they have moral interest that we should be protecting? And most of us would say, absolutely, a dog has interest. I mean, when you kick the dog, she cries, and it's wrong to kick that dog. And most of us would also say, I don't care that much that you're killing your skin cells. And so I think the animal rights argument for personhood places personhood in its appropriate moral and legal domain and clarifies why we should not care about the embryos at the fertility clinics in Alabama. We should care about the dog who's being kicked, or even worse, tortured inside of a lab.
Will this presentation be posted on YouTube? If so, please announce this to our group. Maybe that's a question to you, or maybe it's... So it looks like this will be posted to YouTube then. So we will be emailing to everybody that received the email announcing the event. Have you appealed findings of the court in Sonoma County? When will a higher court rule on this?
We have appealed the case, and I have tremendous appellate litigators for working for me for free of charge. I'm very grateful to the University of Denver and a constitutional law scholar there who's handling the appeal. His name is Justin Marceau, and he's going to be fighting this appeal on our behalf. And I think there's a lot at stake, not just, the conviction, the probation terms that I'm in, but fundamentally that case is going to be about the question of personhood. Under California law, if the chickens we rescued were persons, then we would have been entitled to do everything we did, if these had been children. And I think most people would probably say, even if they had been dogs, if there were dogs collapsed on the ground, starving to death, cannibalizing each other because of the cruel mistreatment they were facing, and we peacefully just walked in, gave aid to the animals, and reported everything we did to the authorities, which we did. And in all these cases, when we did these investigations, when we've done these protests, we literally called the police before we did what we did. So we're not trying to hide anything we did. So in California, there's actually a statute. It's called the Right to Rescue statute, specifically giving you protection for a dog in a hot car. And we are just trying to extend that same principle to a chicken in a factory farm. If you're entitled to break someone's window to help a dog, not even your dog and not your window, then why is a corporation allowed to do so much worse to so many more animals just because they're making money off of that abuse? That doesn't make any sense to me. The fact that, and it's part of the banality of evil, because there's something about the normalization of that cruelty. Most of us, when we see a dog in a hot car, even if factually the circumstances and morally the circumstances are identical to a factory farm confining and cannibalizing thousands of chickens, the dog in a hot car is an abnormal situation, but we all recognize that's not a normal thing. So we're entitled to rectify the abnormal situation. Well, the factory farming industry has done such a wonderful job of normalizing not just their products, but their practices, that when we report things to a district attorney, the factory farms say, like, this is just what everybody does. Like, literally, that is their response. Everybody does it. And, the problem with that argument is as anyone who's taken even high school level moral philosophy knows, that just because something's normal doesn't mean it's right. Right? Just the fact that something exists in the world. All manner of atrocities and oppressions in society could be justified if you could just say, well, everyone else is doing it, so I can too. That's something you learn in the first grade. I think when your teacher tells you, when you come like, well, he did it too, right? That's not an argument that what I'm doing, I'm entitled to do. That just means both of you should stop doing it. And unfortunately, that argument has prevailed in the law. And so we're going to try and reverse that in this appeal. And I think we have a very good chance of winning.
How can Supreme Court find animals as a person when they now are so old and conservative? Will we have to wait until all the Supremes die?
I don't think so. A very old conservative Supreme Court in 2015 ruled after 30 years of blood, sweat, and tears and death, that LGBT people were citizens who were entitled to equal protection. And in 1982, when Evan Wolfson wrote his thesis at Harvard Law School, arguing for, as far as I know, the first time in American history, there will come a day when the Supreme Court rules that I'm a person and I'm entitled to equal protection of the law. The fact that I'm a gay is no reason to deny me my liberty and my rights under the US Constitution. That thesis was so controversial, he could not even find a professor to work with him on it. It took him months. I know this because I've talked to him. He's been an ally and support of ours. He believes in animal rights as well, because he can see the writing on the wall. He can see the arc of history. And, but fundamentally, it was not just about persuading those 5 people. And I think in 2015, Obergefell was a 5-4 decision. It was Anthony Kennedy was the deciding vote. But it was not fundamentally just about persuading those 5 people. The reason those 5 people on the Supreme Court were able to rule that the 14th Amendment protected our LGBT neighbors and friends and family members, their rights, was because millions of Americans across the nation made the case in their own communities. They told their friends at work, their fellow parishioners at congregations like this, that, you know what, I know for a long time we've been treating people who are gay this way, but I don't think it's right. I think they do have a constitutional right to be treated equally. They are human beings, and we have to give them their dignitary interests. And that trickled up. It's always a trick. The history of social movements shows that the elites and the bureaucrats and the people in power respond to popular pressure fundamentally. And this is why, you know, the problem is the banality of evil and not just the uniqueness of evil in the hands of a few insidious people. Even if there are a few insidious people who are definitely causing a lot of the problems, the solution to that problem comes from all of us recognizing we have the power to change that. And so I think if we had a mass movement of citizens, and there's enormous amount of sociological research showing this, the elites, including 5 members of the Supreme Court, would be forced to respond because they'd recognize the writing is on the wall.
If the Supreme Court can rule a corporation as a person, what reason would the Supreme Court not find an animal a person?
Good question. No reason. No reason other than the fact that the current political configuration of our legal system gives corporations massively more power than animals.
Would you care to comment on the public health consequences of these practices? The factory farms, for example, the transmission of bird flu to dairy cattle.
Yeah. So who in this room has heard of H5N1 avian flu that's been going across the country? Okay. So many of you may not know this, but H5N1 is extraordinarily deadly to human beings. And the current case fatality rate. So many of you probably through COVID-19 heard this term, case fatality rate, which is essentially the mortality rate, the recorded death rate. COVID-19 was devastating. And I think the current estimated global case fatality rate of COVID-19 was 1%. Does anyone know what the current recorded, according to the WHO, what the current recorded case fatality rate is of H5N1? Yeah. Yeah, I think it's 56%. This is reported in the New York Times. So 1 in 2 people, more than 1 in 2 people. So the thing that has saved us so far is that H5N1 historically has not been transmitted from human to human. So the humans who get H5N1 get it from a chicken or another bird, and then about half of them have died. But because humans cannot transmit them to each other, and there are very few of us in contact with sick birds on a regular basis, it means the number of people who have died from H5N1, I believe, is in the hundreds worldwide. But until very recently, we thought that H5N1 could not transmit from any mammal to any other mammal. We thought this is a purely bird flu that occasionally would jump to a mammal, and it would kill cats and seals and porpoises and humans too. But mammals could not transmit among mammals. And just a few weeks ago in Texas, for the first time, there's a documented case of H5N1 jumping from a dairy cow to a human being. And that is very dangerous because while cow to human is not the same as human to human, a cow is a lot closer just biologically in terms of their immune system and their antibodies to a human than a chicken is. And a pig is even closer still. And we now have documented evidence that in pig farms and cattle factory farms across the nation, I think the most recent report showed that in dairy, for example, about 1 in 4 dairy products have been tested in the United States right now have shown biological fragments of H5N1. Doesn't mean you're going to get sick from drinking dairy necessarily, because there's pasteurization that kills off the virus. And because, again, the virus, as it's spreading to the dairy cows, is not very efficient right now at going from a mammal to another mammal, much less from a human to human. But the fact that it's happened once shows that the virus is evolving. And the number one cause, every single epidemiologist, every single animal scientist, every single veterinarian who studied the transmission of these diseases, and in particular of avian flu, and you can read, just look up New York Times avian flu, every single expert will tell you the number one cause of this is factory farming. Because when you have large numbers of densely packed sick animals who are so confined, they're literally eating each other alive, that is a breeding ground for disease.
Specifically, what can we do? Where to donate, or can we join a group?
So I am the executive director and co-founder of an organization called the Simple Heart Initiative. It's actually going through a rebranding process. And our goal is to use the rescue of animals as a fulcrum through which you can push a broader legal transformation in personhood. We've gotten support from some extremely distinguished law professors, including Larry Tribe at Harvard. He recently wrote me an email a few months ago, indicating that, he's supportive of our general theory, which is, at least initially, if we want to assert personhood for animals, if we want to say that these animals have some legal and moral rights, it's easier for us to assert that right defensively instead of trying to take other people's rights away. Just say, look, just from a criminal defense perspective, if I'm giving aid to an animal because they're sick and dying, their personhood is a necessary antecedent to my act. Recognizing this animal had moral and legal interests, that they are a person, is important for me to defend myself. And our strategy is to use that mechanism to get the rights of animals into the courtroom and create a broader transformation on a legal system. But there's so many different groups. PETA, for example, is a very controversial group, but I think they're brilliant. I think they use disruptive tactics, the media, in beautiful and elegant ways. It's not everyone's cup of tea. They do a lot of wild things, a lot of things that I personally would not do, but I think they're extraordinarily effective. And Ingrid Newkirk is one of my heroes. She's the founder of PETA and has been an extraordinary animal rights activist. And for the record, a very fundamentally decent human being who's cared about human rights. Back in the 80s, when she started PETA, she was a huge supporter of gay rights back then too. And it's no surprise, because someone who's compassionate enough and independent enough to say that I care about animals in the 1980s, when she started PETA, it's no surprise to me she was also a huge supporter of gay rights far before anyone else in this country was. So I think PETA is an amazing group, but there's so many different groups, and there are a lot of local groups. Even just going to your local dog and cat shelter. I mean, we don't realize, even for the animals we see as more valuable animals like dogs and cats, there are 60,000 dogs subjected to experiments that are so awful, I don't even want to talk about them in this country every year. There are hundreds of thousands of dogs killed every year in this country for the crime of having no one who loves them. We talk about the unhoused population of human beings, which is a horrible moral crisis in this nation. We don't talk about the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of dogs, potentially millions, because the numbers aren't particularly good, who are killed for the crime of being unhoused. This poor dog who's just running around the street and no one loves them. No one wants to take them in. They're just killed, and it's very sad. So, rescue your dogs to the extent you can avoid. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional because I lost my cat and my dog. I've both a cat and a dog in recent years, so it's still, we know how special they are. And the fact that someone would kill a dog just because she doesn't have a family and no one loves her. I mean, all these animals deserve love, So one thing you can do that's very powerful is just adopt one of these creatures in your own life. And I can tell you, adopting a dog is just one of the most magical experiences anyone can ever have. I know, Laura, you bring your dog. We all know how beautiful these creatures are. It's horrible what we've done to them in terms of making them dependent on us, but it's made them beautiful creatures who are the only being in your life who will ever truly unconditionally love you. And I have family that I love dearly. I mean, I'm not saying my family isn't wonderful, because my mom was the best human being I ever met. But even my mom did not unconditionally love me the way my dog does. And so, adopt a dog, try to avoid the breeders. The breeders are often cruel, violent places, and buying animals does commodify them in the same way that buying eggs commodifies them. So to the extent you can, rescue them from a shelter. And they're wonderful. We were lucky enough in San Francisco to have one of the best SPCAs in the country. The SFSPCA is tremendous. They've been no-kill for a long time. They do a tremendous job caring for each individual animal as an individual, and they will help you find a dog who's right for you, and it'll change your life for the better.
Dolores has asked me to point out that we have some information here in the back, which addresses a lot of these topics. So I invite you to come to the back table. I want to thank Attorney Wayne Hsiung for his excellent presentation today. We are running out of time, but we can also ask him questions after the cessation. So again, Attorney Wayne Hsiung, you did an amazing job today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and maybe you could just shoot me an email. I know the service is starting, so if you'd like to ask me questions, maybe the better route is just shoot me an email at wayne@simpleheart.org. Okay? Or you can email Dolores and she can put you in touch with me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Just to close the meeting, come back next Sunday for Richard Becker talking about Israel, Palestine, and U.S. imperialism. Thank you. And I'd like to add that if you like the SPCA, I had a wonderful experience volunteering there. It's something anybody can do. If you don't have the space to keep a dog or a cat in your own house, you can become a kind of a foster parent for a couple of hours a day or a week or whatever. It's really fun. I agree.
You know, I think the government itself and the corporations that pursued this prosecution would concede their main concern was not the handful of sick and dying animals we rescued from factory farms, but the fact that we exposed what was happening to those animals. And that is the subject of the talk today.